Yeah. This is totally 1776. Totally. What is this? Yeah. 1776. Totally. Totally. Wait, what the heck is this? They got a whole thing set up. You know, they had phones. Okay, here we are. In 1776. Yeah, that's what. I don't know. I don't know what I'm supposed to say, but yeah. Okay, I'm gonna be straight up for real. I think I might have been pranked. Yeah, I thought I was being the smart one. The frick? 1770 frickin' sex, really? You know those, like, basically what happened, right, is, you know these time travel, TikTok, YouTube cringe, show cringe? Well, they'll be like, oh, we time traveled. And they'll get a time traveler and they'll pay them, right? Yeah, so I saw on the TV, right? Like, I'll become a real-life time traveler.
Sign up with netheaven.com today to become a real-life time traveler.
And that'd be funny to lie about time traveling, because these guys, they're like, oh, we're going to time travel, and you know what I'm talking about, right? Like, these fake time traveler influencers. So I thought I was exploiting gullible people, really, by doing this. So basically, they told me, go through the door, and boom, I'll be in 1776. So I thought they might have had something set up, maybe, but like it was a freaking phone, and I don't think this is 1776. Whoop-de-doo, it's 1776. Okay, I'm being serious. What the frick is going on? There's nobody out here. They pranked me. They freaking pranked me. I thought I was signing up to be on a freaking influencer show about time traveling where they lie. There's nobody here. Like, I knew it wasn't going to be real, but like, I'm just left in the abyss. What the frick?
The British are coming! The British are coming!
Excuse me, what?
Yankee Doodle came to town a-riding on a pony, stuck a feather in his cap and called it macaroni. Father and I went down to camp along with Captain Goodwin, and there we saw the men and boys as thick as hasty pudding. Yankee Doodle, keep it up, Yankee Doodle dandy, mind the music and the step, and with the girls be handy. And there they'd pipe away like fun and play on cornstalk fiddles, and some had ribbons red as blood all bound around their middles. Keep it up, Yankee Doodle dandy, mind the music and the step, and with the girls be handy. And there was Captain Washington upon a slapping stallion, giving orders to his men. I guess there was a million. Yankee Doodle, keep it up, Yankee Doodle dandy, mind the music and the step, and with the girls be handy. And there I see a little keg, its head were made of leather. They knocked upon with little sticks to call the men together. Yankee Doodle, keep it up, Yankee Doodle dandy, mind the music and the step, and with the girls be handy. And there they had a swamping gun as big as a log of maple, on a mighty little cart, a load for father's cattle. Yankee Doodle, keep it up, Yankee Doodle dandy, mind the music and the step, and with the girls be handy. And every time they fired it off, it took a hold of powder. It made a noise like father's gun, only a nation louder. Yankee Doodle, keep it up, Yankee Doodle dandy, mind the music and the step, and with the girls be handy. It scared me so I hooked it off, nor stopped as I remember, nor turned about till I got home, locked up in mother's chamber. Yankee Doodle, keep it up, Yankee Doodle dandy, mind
The history of the world is motivated by the history of the presidency. A bold combination makes shocking events and turns the world upside down. Welcome to History of the Presidency. I am the narrator, and I will be taking you on this journey to discover the mysteries and the stories of the American presidency and how it impacted everything. Let's begin, shall we?
No, perhaps we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. I'm sure the audience is confused by that guy that just randomly appeared at the intro.
Perhaps you're right, Mike. Maybe we are getting a little ahead of ourselves. So let me address the elephant in the room. That is Jake Macdonald. Now, Jake Macdonald is this silly American from the state where seemingly everyone is from, right? Everyone seems to be from New Jersey. He is from New Jersey. He was going to Montana, and we set up this little thing called netheaven.com to trick him. Basically, he thought he was being smart. We actually were being completely honest that we were going to create a time travel thing for him to go back in time, and he thought he was being smart and we were doing this fake thing for YouTube. But no. We actually sent him back in time, and he's very dumb, as most Americans are, it seems. As we will find out correctly, right? But don't worry, he's fine. We gave him food. We gave him tons of modern stuff, He won't even know. And he didn't even know, as you saw in the beginning. So, yes. That is Jake. And let's say hi to Jake Macdonald.
Narrator, you're a piece of shit, right? Yeah. Dude, I am freaking wiping my ass with your bullshit. Freaking send me back 200 years with fucking stupid ass shit. Come on. I'm gonna sue your ass. It should be illegal.
Are you really on the toilet right now? On this documentary?
Yeah, I'm on the fucking toilet. And also, how was I supposed to know? How was I supposed to know you're gonna send me back? And okay?
You didn't even know if it was 1775. You said 1776 the whole time. We even gave you the receipts.
Okay, I'll take the L on that. Yeah, it was freaking 75, but now it's 76, and they got freaking fireworks going off like shit. I'm just gonna stay in here. And, thanks for the toilet paper, I guess, but screw you.
Don't worry, Jake. We made you immortal. You're not gonna age one bit.
You made me freaking immortal? To freaking time travel? What the fuck? Not gonna happen, dude. I'm gonna evade you like a freaking Sonic the freaking Hedgehog. Freaking piece of shit. Get out!
Well, that was Jake Macdonald, ladies and gentlemen. I apologize for the vulgar language from the American, But most of you are probably American, There's nothing wrong with being American, just as long as you're not like him. But, Jake isn't the only person we brought on our team to report. Although we'll be seeing more of him, there are other people we'll see more of. And let me introduce you to others. First, you heard him earlier. This is Mike. And his name is just Mike.
My name is Mike, and I will be joining my good friend the narrator on our journey to teach you more about the American presidency and its impact on the world. I lost my body many years ago in an accident with a certain shotgun, but I might only be a voice, but that will not stop me from informing you on this important events in history, because this is the greatest documentary you will ever see in your life, and we can guarantee you that.
We want to give a variety of perspectives. So let me introduce our liberal and conservative pundits to the table. You have your token liberal, your token conservative. Let me introduce themselves.
My name is Bernie Pelosi. I am a professor of sociology, gender studies, and history at Stanford University, and I will be representing the liberal perspective and the mainstream democratic perspective of the American presidency to ensure liberty and freedom across all marginalized communities and respect and tolerance all across the entire world.
My name is Charles Walter Smith IV. My friends and family call me C-Dub-4. And I'm representing America, the American point of view. I'm a proud conservative.
And you know, liberals, conservatives, they're kind of moderate, so let's go more to the extremes. And I'm going to give the leftist their table. Will the anarchist and communists please introduce themselves?
My name is Jim Macdonald, and I've been asked to represent the anarchist perspective because I am an anarchist.
I am none other than Nicholas Smirnoff, of course, a champion of the workers' movement, and I have a bachelor's, of course, in economics, of course, and I am representing communism and Marxism in this documentary series.
And those were the leftists. Now, will the more extreme conservatives introduce themselves? We have, of course, our resident Donald Trump fanatic.
I'm none other than Jack Diamond, and I'm representing the ideology of our greatest president, Donald J. Trump, and, of course, the great movement of QAnon, and I am representing the people and freedom against the deep state and the Matrix, who are trying to stop freedom and trying to suppress masculinity.
And we, of course, have the one and only President Richard Nixon.
My name is Richard Nixon. I am the 37th United States President, and I will represent the people and the Republican Party of the United States of America.
And just to shake it up a little bit, we have Satan.
Yes, I am Satan, Dark Lord of the Underworld, also known as the Devil, Lucifer, go by many names, and had some very good experience with the presidency when it comes to getting souls for hell, so yeah.
So those are our interviewee staff, along with me, your narrator, and Mike. We will be giving you information on the brilliant American presidency, although I shouldn't say the word brilliant, should I? Because you're about to find out the problems. But there are some good moments. And the last thing I need to introduce to you, the main idea is about grading. Now in school, you were obviously graded, and if you... I'm trying not to roast you, but obviously you did not do very well in school. I'm joking. You did amazing, right? We're going to use the American metrics because it's only fair, and it's out of 100, right? We'll give them letter grades. Now, we'll see how every president does on these letter grade scale. They could get anywhere as low to 0.1 and anywhere as high as 100. So let's see. Do you think there will be any hundreds? Place your bets now. You know what I mean. I'm being very shaky because I'm nervous. This is an amazing opportunity. You know what I mean. So finally, let's begin HOTP, History of the Presidency, and this is sponsored by Waiver Film Productions, who have been our gracious hosts to show you this documentary. Very big credits to Aidan Cirillo and River Macdonald for allowing us to do the series. Thank you very much, and enjoy the show. Let's begin. Before we jump into the American presidency, it's important that I give you some background, because it's honestly quite shocking what America did. It's a miracle. Most people did not expect them to ever become their own nation. Revolution against the strongest empire on earth. The British Empire's power was unparalleled, and through sheer determination, and the French, they succeeded. And they broke away from the British. One thing you might notice if you look at dates and timelines, and one thing you might notice is that the United States of America was established, let's say July 4th, 1776. You'll notice something quite interesting. The first president of the United States becomes president in 1789. So what happened? What were we doing? And why did there become a president in 1789? Why did there, what did they have before? I said we, and I am not going to associate myself with them, but what did they have before? Well, before the famous U.S. Constitution, there was something called the Articles of Confederation.
The Articles of Confederation were a disaster in almost every proportion, other than, of course, not giving the President of the Congress any power to make executive decisions. Of course, the biggest problem with the Articles is that in order to actually amend something, they had to give the approval of all 13 states, which just wasn't very possible. The fact of the matter is, a state like New Hampshire had more similarity with the Canadian colonists than they did with a state like Georgia. So it became very clear, especially through the 1780s, that something needed to be done to change the Articles, because they just were not very effective at getting things done in this new nation.
Mike is absolutely correct. Something needed to be done. The Articles just were not working. So, in 1787, the brightest minds in all of America got together to have the United States' first and only Constitutional Convention. The main purpose of this convention was to give the government enough power to actually do things. Because the Articles were not working, a new constitution had to be given out, so the government needed to actually be strong. But at the same time, you didn't want to completely erode away the power of states. It's the United States, not the United Country. There are states, and they should have power too. But this idea of compromise was not just felt there. It was also felt between the states. Because there were competing interests by everybody. The northern states versus the southern states. The rich states versus the poor states. The big states versus the small states. With all these competing interests, it became very difficult to create progress, to actually get a constitution. Do you know how long the Constitutional Convention ended up lasting? Do you know how long? Was it 40 days? No, that seems short, right? No, was it 60 days? Maybe 80. No, it was 116 days! Americans, what are you doing? 116 days? It was 116 days to write the new Constitution. That's how much craziness was going off. In the beginning of the convention, it wasn't even very clear what kind of government the United States wanted to have. All the world had ever known at that point was monarchy. So was it just going to be a monarchy? They decided a republic. Now, a republic hadn't really been seen since the time of Rome. There were some small areas of the world where there were republics, but overall, a republic was very, very uncommon. Very uncommon. A republic is not a democracy necessarily. A republic simply just doesn't have a king. This was huge, and this affects the presidency big, because the president was not going to be a king. Instead, he was going to share power with the other branches of government. There were going to be 3 branches. Obviously, the president is the executive branch. The executive branch. The executive branch enforces laws. The judicial branch upholds laws. And the legislative branch, the Congress, makes laws. This power-sharing dynamic, and it can be far complicated. It's far more complicated than I'm explaining it. You got to go look into it, because the Constitution is a rather simple document, one of the shorter constitutions of the world, but it is more complicated than it seems, because it orchestrates the U.S. government into this position where no branch can be more powerful than the other. It's a very smart system. And honestly, I gotta give Americans credit for that. You know, they're mostly stupid, but I gotta give credit for that. That was the main constitution that was being proposed. But even so, many states didn't want to do it. We almost never had a constitution, and we almost never had a United States, because eventually it was going to break up, because it never had a uniform government. States like New York, for example, just wasn't interested in it for a while. So, something needed to be done. People needed to be convinced to follow this new constitution, so let me introduce you to a few figures that are going to be very important over this era, the founding era of the United States. These figures are, in no particular order, John Jay, Alexander Hamilton, and James Madison, who we're going to be seeing later. All of these figures wrote the Federalist Papers. The idea was to convince New Yorkers to adopt the Constitution.
The plan was to write a total of 25 essays, the work divided evenly among the three men. In the end, they wrote 85 essays in the span of 6 months. John Jay got sick after writing 5. James Madison wrote 29. Hamilton wrote the other 51.
And it worked. The Constitution was adopted. And we needed a president. So who was going to be the president? It's not really a question. That's what I can tell you. It's not really a question. George Washington was the hero of the Revolutionary War. A warrior. A general. He was the one who was loved by most. People respected him from all different backgrounds. If anyone was going to be president, it was him. And although he took some convincing, on April 30th, 1789, he was inaugurated president of the United States of America.
I, George Washington, solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve and protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. So help me God.
Oh yeah, bitch!
George Washington. Independent. 1789 to 1797. 57 years old. From Virginia.
Brilliant president. I still think he is the best president.
George Washington was the father of our country in every single way. He was a strong leader. He really kicked the British's ass. We would not have America without George Washington.
George Washington was such a good president and not respected by a lot of people. You see, the rioters, the looters, and the Black Lives Matter movement who just tear down his statues because they don't respect that he's a real individual. George Washington was an incredible president and a great leader that stood against the system and stood against the deep state and the matrix of the British Empire and created the greatest country of all time. Despite a load of criticisms and hurt for the African American community, I overall think George Washington was a fantastic president and a great leader who was actually really ahead of his time when it comes to civil rights.
George Washington wanted to be king. He chose not to be king when that wasn't politically expedient. And just sort of a doddering old man who, at that point of his life, and fuck him.
George Washington is the representation of the elite, the incompetent, wealthy oligarchs that controlled this country, and the fact that people respect him at such a high level proves that a lot of people just don't understand anything about economics.
Though most of our interviewee staff seems to think that Washington was a very good president, the leftists in particular are not too much of a fan of George Washington. So, who's right? Who is right? And I'm going to give you the word down, because my word is the law here, and the fact of the matter is, George Washington is overrated. Very overrated.
Dude, I thought Washington was the GOAT. The GOAT of presidents.
Well, quite cute of Jake to think that, but that's just to be expected with such silly opinions, you know? The goat. He's a human, not a goat. But at the end of the day, no. George Washington is overrated. And before I can completely tell you why, we need to know about his personality, his character.
Now, George Washington was a very pragmatic individual, a rule follower. But what a lot of people don't know is that he wasn't always like this. See, in his youth, he actually had to learn this idea, this pragmatic idea, the hard way. Because what most people don't know is that in his youth, Washington inadvertently started the First World War.
In the 1750s, the British and French were claiming more and more land in the New World. The British had the 13 American colonies, but they also wanted the Ohio River Valley. The valley had rich and productive farmland. Many British had come to America specifically to farm. The French, on the other hand, wanted full access to the Ohio River Valley for their fur trade. They had trapped animals for their fur pelts for many years in Canada, but felt they should be able to claim land in America for France. To make a solid claim to the land, the French began to build a string of forts. The English sent a letter to the French by way of a young messenger, 21-year-old George Washington. The letter stated that the French claim was wrong and told them to leave. The French responded by capturing an English fort. This is what started the war.
Long story short, Washington led his men into a massacre. Once you do that, you end up being quite more hesitant to do bold things. But ultimately, this shows his personality, but it also shows that he was, quite frankly, a very bad military leader in every regard.
Now, it was during his time as a youth in the British Army that I was able to make a deal with George Washington to maintain his status after screwing up so badly.
Very poor. Sure, he had a few successes, like, of course, his famous crossing of the Delaware, but throughout the Revolutionary War and the French and Indian War, he was outmaneuvered by British generals. There's nothing else to be said. He was outmaneuvered. He was blindsided by Benedict Arnold. That's a fun story. We're going to get to that later. Actually, let's get into it now. How did that transpire? How did the Benedict Arnold thing transpire? Now, although this is disputed by historians, some say, which is me, I'd like to believe, let's make this fun, they had an epic duel.
Benedict Arnold? Yes, Georgie. How's it gonna feel losing the war? You are a traitor! You stabbed me in the back! Then let's fight it out, George. You're such a weak American. I am not the British God. You betrayed your own country! You are nothing! Yeah! For America!
Now, whether they had an epic duel or not, he was blindsided by Arnold. He was not a very good military leader. Just wasn't. He was very poor and very overrated. Now, his descendant, Robert E. Lee, is a very good military leader, and he's going to be a huge thorn in the side of the Mexicans and the Americans. But you'll have to wait and see, right? But he just wasn't very good. What was he then? He was a very good leader, an orator. He could inspire people, and nothing better shows that than his brilliant speech at Valley Forge. Now, at Valley Forge, the troops were, let's say, not going through the best of times.
We want meat! We want meat! I got smallpox! I got freaking cholera! It sucks! I'm leaving, dude! The war is stupid!
So Washington needed to inspire them. How did he do that?
My brave fellows, You have done all I ask you to do, and more than can be reasonably expected. But your country is at stake. Your wives, your houses, and all you hold dear. You have worn yourselves out with fatigues and hardship, but we know not how to spare you. If you will consent to stay 1 month longer, you will render that service to the cause of liberty and your own country, which probably can never do under any other circumstances.
Yeah, bitch! Whoop! This good leadership ability, along with his pragmatism, impacted the rest of his presidency. But what was his greatest strength? Because it wasn't those two things, certainly some of his strengths, but also, in part, his weakness, because you can be too pragmatic, and sometimes he certainly was. And when it comes to leadership, there's only so much that will get you in life. Leadership. Sometimes it just doesn't work. So what was his greatest ability? It was who to work with. 90% of directing is casting, and George Washington understood this. So we have something to bring to the table, an important part of the executive branch, and an important part of the presidency. It's called the cabinet. But not that type of cabinet. That type of cabinet. A group of people to help do the smaller stuff, because we're not just focused on one thing, it's split in many different divisions, right? Different divisions, different categories of governments. Economy, military, diplomacy, law, all different things that need to be looked over. Washington understood that he needed to get a good group of people together if he was actually going to get anything done. And I'm going to say it, but Washington had the best cabinet in American history. There's no competition. Thomas Jefferson, great relationship with the French. He wrote the Declaration of Independence. Secretary of State. Hamilton is a genius. Comes from a poor background, but he rose the ranks. And we'll see more of him, and we'll be talking more about Hamilton, because Hamilton's a very interesting figure. Hamilton, he's economically minded. He is our treasurer, a secretary of the Treasury. Now, of course, you can't forget about war. You can't. Henry Knox is our Secretary of War. And our Attorney General, who is less often known, was Edmund Rudolph. So them together were able to create the perfect cabinet for Washington to legislate. And it was very well done. There's also, there's also John Adams. John Adams. Yeah, John Adams was vice president, by the way. He was also there. He had no job, because John Adams is a failure. And we'll get into John Adams because, he sucked. But, getting aside from that, the cabinet was amazing. And they were able to run the country quite well in this new age of rising America, rising United States. It's very interesting. By 1792, Washington remained very, very popular as president. And he did the no-brainer move and just run for a second term, as everyone wanted him to do. Run for a second term. And he was unopposed. He ran unopposed. No one ran against him. You'll see how rare that is, to run unopposed as president. There's only one other person other than him that runs opposed to him. And spoiler alert, it's in this episode. Can you guess which one of these faces will run unopposed? Leave your bets now. But yeah, he runs unopposed, and that's insane, because, Americans can't really think for themselves, but, the real reason is he was just very popular. So, we go into his second term, and for his first term, that was pretty good. First term of the first president, pretty good start for the United States of America, right? Pretty good. Pretty good, right? Well, although he doesn't have a big of a drop in his second term, and we'll see that there's a common trend with presidents, where their first term will be pretty good, and then their second term will be hit the roof, you know what I mean? You know what I mean. You are hopefully intelligent, but a lot of you aren't. Yeah.
Washington didn't really have that problem. It wasn't that much of a drop from his first term to his second term. What actually happened is a lot of the problems that were still in his first term slowly started to reveal themselves. And we started to realize that this country isn't going to have such an easy time. The main problem, and the biggest problem with Washington and the United States, is slavery. Slavery. I haven't mentioned it yet, but it's so important because it impacts everything. The main crux of slavery is that slavery happens, and although slavery were everywhere, eventually the North had no reason for slaves. The reason why is because the South needed slaves in order to prop up their economy. Cotton? It was an agrarian society, very lush, very moist. That is where the slaves, and that's where you can make a lot of money. In the North, there was no need for slaves because it was far colder weather. They couldn't grow the same things. So slaves were pointless, and eventually slavery was just outlawed. It was both seen as unethical, and it was just seen as an economic problem. So this clash, both ethically, culturally, and economically, between the South and the North of the United States of America, is going to impact everything for many, many decades to come. And eventually, it's going to explode in an event called the Civil War. But aren't we getting a little ahead of ourselves, aren't we? We are getting a little ahead of ourselves, are we? Yes, we are. So, ultimately, between this debate between the North and the South of slavery, Washington was from Virginia, which is in the South. He owned slaves. He owned many slaves. And although his slaves were eventually released, his Mount Vernon slaves, they were released after his death.
Oh no, George. Are you sick? Time to take out all your blood so we can heal you. Let's do that. We're gonna take all your blood.
Although they were supposed to be released after his wife's death. But his wife realized that it was probably unwise to have many people waiting for you to die. Their freedom depended on your death. And Martha is not the most wise woman, but she's certainly wise enough to realize that. So yeah, credit to Martha Washington.
Why did you say that name?
You know, I don't know who the editor is in placing these memes, but they're freaking stupid. They're stupid. They're freaking stupid. I'm very, very, very upset. This is a sophisticated show. Is it you, Mike? Is it you? Is it the goddamn Jack Diamond guy? Probably, I don't know. I'm going to find you, though. It was unacceptable, okay? But in general, this debate about slavery was actually seen as going to go away anyway. That's the weird thing. When the Constitution was wrote, slavery was fizzling out. Slavery was expected to die quickly. No one expected a slavery to live on. That's why it's not really addressed in the Constitution. It's addressed a little bit in of course, the very infamous 3/5 Compromise.
You had some big states, you had some small states, you had some free states, you had some slave states, and they decided, hey, in the South, we got all these slaves, and they're people. They should count towards our population. And the Northerners are saying, well, no, they're slaves. They shouldn't count towards your population because you haven't given them freedom. And so they said, well, okay, we'll treat them as 3/5 of a person to make it fair.
Now, there seems to be a bit of a debate about whether it was 3/5 of a person or 3/5 of all people, but let me state something to the naysayers. Those are mathematically equivalent statements, you gnome. I mean, come on. Really? That's the hill you're going to die on. Yes, that's the hill you're going to die on. But overall, that's the only time it's mentioned in the Constitution, because slavery was expected to fizzle out. It was dying. So what changed everything? The cotton gin. Yes, the Industrial Revolution changed everything. And now that the cotton gin existed, you could pick more cotton. And now slavery was very, very profitable.
And in the 1790s, it became very clear that slavery is not going away. It's not going to fizzle out. Oh, it's only going to get bigger. And this affected everything. Slavery. So let's understand slavery. And I'm going to give to a guest man to explain what slavery was like in the 1790s.
There were laws enacted that would state that if you were to kill a black child through beating them, which was almost like a pastime to white women at the time, then you could not be held legally accountable for those actions. It was deemed as just a loss of property versus a loss of anything else.
Yes, it's very true that this northern and southern divide was growing, and it would become one of his greatest short sides as president, as he was not decisive enough, and he continued to allow the Southerners to enslave people, which is a very messed up institution, and ultimately leads to a lot of problems in the country, including inequalities and inequities, which really needed to stop, and it was not good.
Slavery was one debate, but there were many others as well. And the big one is finance. Would the United States have a central bank or not?
The central bank. Nearly every country in the world has a central bank, or institution that manages the currency and monetary policy of an entire country. Unlike a commercial bank, a central bank has a monopoly on how much money can be created and put in circulation. That's quite a power, as historically, countries have risen and fallen due to the value of their currency.
As you can see, this whole central bank and this whole economic system is so important to the actual functioning of the country. Was it going to have one? Was it going to not? It was definitely up in the air. Now, who wanted one?
Alexander Hamilton. My name is Alexander Hamilton.
Secretary of the Treasury, and it would be a lot easier to manage finances if we had one central bank. But many others did not want one, especially from more agricultural-based economies, more farmer-based systems. And those who didn't want those, just didn't like how the government was so huge under those systems. So this forms really the two political parties of the United States. Before there were Democrats and Republicans, there were Federalists and Democratic Republicans. Those were the two parties. And while the Federalists wanted a bigger government, the Democratic Republicans wanted a smaller one. And although that's a vast oversimplification, that's basically how it goes.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We fought for these ideals, we shouldn't settle for less. These are wise words, enterprising men quote them. Don't act surprised, you guys, cause I wrote them. Ow, but Hamilton forgets. His plan would have the government assume states' debts. Now place your bets as to who that benefits. The very seat of government where Hamilton sits.
Not true.
Oh, if the shoe fits, wear it. If New York's in debt, why should Virginia bear it? Our debts are paid, I'm afraid. Don't tax the South, cause we got it made in the shade. In Virginia, we plant seeds in the ground. We create. You just want to move our money around. This financial plan is an outrageous demand, and it's too many damn pages for any man to understand. Stand with me in the land of the free. Pray to God we never see Hamilton's candidacy. Look, when Britain taxed our tea, we got frisky. Imagine what gonna happen when you try to tax our whiskey.
Thank you, Secretary Jefferson. Secretary Hamilton, your response. Thomas, that was a real nice declaration. Welcome to the present. We're running a real nation. Would you like to join us? Or stay mellow, doing whatever the hell it is you do in Monticello. If we assume the debts the union gets, a new line of credit, a financial diuretic, how do you not get it? If we're aggressive and competitive, the union gets a boost. You'd rather give it a sedative? A civics lesson from a slaver. Hey neighbor, your debts are paid because you don't pay for labor. We plant seeds in the South, we create, you keep ranting. We know who's really doing the planting. And another thing, Mr. Age of Enlightenment, don't lecture me about the war, you didn't fight in it. You think I'm frightened of you, man? We almost died in the trench while you were off getting high with the French. Thomas Jefferson always hesitant with the president. Reticent, there isn't a plan he hasn't jettisoned. Madison, you mad as a hatter, son, take your medicine. Damn, you in worse shape than the national debt is in. Sitting there useless as two shits. Hey, turn around, bend over, I'll show you where my shoe fits.
The rivalry between Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson, and of course the same thing with John Adams and Jefferson, and the Federalist Democratic Republican dichotomy and that whole thing, is so often looked at in American textbooks as some important events, but they're rather irrelevant to what's actually going on, because we focus often so much on the big things that we miss the small details. And the truth is, this was nothing more than Mean Girls. This was nothing more than high school squabbling among the wealthy elite. And you need to actually look at this from a critical perspective. In reality, they were just rich people who disagreed on how to rip off the people of the United States the best. And they weren't even elected. They were just elected by other rich people. There's no respect I have for them, and this cult dichotomy needs to end. No one gives a crap about the rivalries. So, the country reached a gridlock. Were we going to have a central bank? And this shows another flaw with Washington's leadership. Although he preferred the Federalists, he was an independent, and our only independent president. He didn't belong to any political party. But, as I said, he preferred the Federalists. So was he going to say anything? Was he going to lead? Not really. And that's the problem with Washington. He was a good leader, but indecisive, and ultimately overrated, as I stated before. So how did this end up fixing itself? Well, Washington wasn't going to fix it, so who was going to fix it? Well, here's how it was fixed. And it all goes back to the famous musical Hamilton. In the song A Room Where It Happens, in this song, we basically see James Madison and Thomas Jefferson meet with Alexander Hamilton and Alexander Hamilton proposes a deal. Now, obviously, Hamilton needed his banking system. That's really all he cared about, and basically offered, how about this? Here is the great compromise we can have. We can put the capital of the United States, not in New York, not in Philadelphia, not in New Jersey, but have it actually in Virginia, on southern land, which was definitely something wanted by the Virginians, and it was very good. And of course, in return, Hamilton said, "Okay, and then I'll have my banking system," and Madison and Jefferson definitely accepted. It was a difficult deal, a lot of maneuvering, but they ultimately accepted the proposal.
The immigrant emerges with unprecedented financial power, a system he can shape however he wants. The Virginians emerge with the nation's capital. And here's the pièce de résistance. No one else was in the room where it happened, the room where it happened, the room where it happened.
And Hamilton's like, I don't really care where that the capital is here, I just want the bank. And that's ultimately what he wanted, because Hamilton understood that finance was ultimately more important than the seat of government. That the seat of government can change around, whatever, it hasn't changed, but the seat of government was not that important to him. Of course, in one way he was right, in another way he was wrong, as we'll see in the Civil War later, many, many years later. The seat of government is so crucial, and Hamilton definitely underestimated that. But he never lived to see it, thanks to a man named Aaron. Now that the finance problem has been solved for now, and now that the capital problem has been solved, and luckily that will remain solved, although there are other issues we'll get into later, what is the next problem to hit the United States of America? What is the next problem? What is it? Well, it all goes back to my good pal Europe. Europe, yes. Europe, you try to break away from Europe, but that doesn't mean you're gone from Europe. You still have ties. And you still have a very important trade route, especially considering that the South sells so much cotton to Europe. The Atlantic trade zone was pretty big. And what was the problem? Well,
Europe has been going through its bit of changes. We weren't the only guys to be kind of down with the idea of being a republic. See, France got some ideas, and they had a revolution, and they're in the middle of a revolution. And not a lot of Europe is liking them right now, but France is still quite powerful. So the US, who's trading with both France and Britain, is pressured to pick sides. Who are they going to choose? France or Britain?
It depended where you were on the political spectrum, but the Federalists were very pro-British. They saw the trading relations, they saw that Britain had a very strong economy, and that they were ultimately British colonists. That's what they were, only a few decades ago. Now, then there were, of course, the Democratic Republicans, as they were called. And they said, hey, France helped us win the Revolutionary War, we should help them. And there were many counters to this, right? That France was going through revolution, it was unstable, it's not even the same France. But Thomas Jefferson and many others saw that France was embracing what they said were democratic values, that it came largely from the American Revolution. So it became a very fierce debate between both sides. Was it, should we side with Britain, or should we side with France?
Washington left the United States in a hole in that regard. It was still so important to figure this out, and it just wasn't. What was going to happen?
Now, the whole British and France controversy of who the United States were going to side with, who America was going to side with, is a great example of divide and conquer, because they split the country in two. This is a common tactic that the deep state and the matrix use against us. Now, here's the thing. Did George Washington handle it well? He handled it great, because we cannot be split. He cannot be split. In reality, George Washington is the first president of the Republican Party, and really all the good presidents of the United States, you can say, were actually Republicans, because they understood things. Now, of course, not all Republicans are good presidents, to its own extent, because Republicanism has had its ups and downs, and have also been part of the deep state and matrix. We all know about the rhinos, but in reality, like, we see the leading to the ideology of Donald Trump, who is our greatest president, and we see how Washington led to that exchange. And we know if Washington was alive today, that he would vote for Donald Trump and wear a MAGA hat, and I wish I could wear a MAGA hat, but unfortunately, the narrator has told me I could not, which is, of course, a symptom of the Matrix and the deep state, who are trying to suppress freedom and trying to suppress liberty.
While all that is going on abroad, some very interesting events are going on domestically. Well, you know, you gotta make money as a country, and so you have taxes. And back then, with very unclean drinking water, what did most people drink? Good old alcohol and good old whiskey, because they killed germs, they were very clean to drink. So, since everyone loved whiskey, Washington, the government, they were like, let's tax whiskey. Let's tax whiskey. A lot of people got pissed that you're taxing whiskey, and it's kind of interesting, you know, you fought a war to get away from stupid taxes over tea. That's not the only reason, but that's one of the reasons, dude. And I said the word dude. Oh my god, I'm such an idiot. I'm sorry. I apologize sincerely to the Lord. I'm sorry. Okay. That aside, I mean, really? And it was found quite hypocritical by a lot of Americans. Like, what are you, like, really? You're gonna tax whiskey? But you can't expect much from the government very often. They never live up to their word, and you'll find this with a lot of presidents don't live up to their word when it comes to taxes. Wink, wink. Wink, wink. I said wink, wink, but I didn't wink, wink. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. So a lot of farmers in Pennsylvania said, screw you, Washington. Let's rebel. We'll have a second declaration over whiskey. It was called the Whiskey Rebellion, and it was crushed immediately. But guess how it was crushed? Oh, he did it in the most disrespectful way possible. George Washington went on to battle himself. He led troops to end the Whiskey Rebellion. That is a violation
I have to give credit to Washington there. I have to give credit. I have to. By the year of 1796, Washington's second term was up, and he could have easily run again. Easily. He was a very popular president, and many wanted him to be president for life. So, what happened? Did he run again? Well, he actually didn't. Now, why didn't he run again is the real question. Is it to set a precedent? Which it did. And this precedent, by not running again, went on for many years. Most presidents would not run more than 2 terms. Now, eventually, in the mid-1940s, the U.S. Constitution would be amended and the presidency would be limited to 2 terms. Because one man, and we'll get to him in another episode, ended up running for a very long period of time. But, that is spoilers, and I'm not going to tell you who. You'll have to wait and see. But, who's gonna, no, most people didn't run again. Most presidents did not run again after that. There are a few exceptions, but yeah, this set a huge precedent. Now, was it to set the precedent? Was it to set the precedent? Or was it because he was ill? And that's the real question. And it really was for a combination of the reasons. Now, I'm going to get back to something that an interviewee previously said a long period ago that I have not corrected, but I've decided that I was going to be nice to my interviewee staff and I'm going to let them say whatever they want. And then I said, and now I realize that, nah, no. If you say something stupid, I'm going to correct you on it, okay? Okay? And I will be correcting everyone. It's not going to be some political bias thing, but let's get into the idiot. Who is it? It's actually the anarchist.
George Washington wanted to be king?
Yes, there is absolutely, it's very, very much disputed and honestly refuted that Washington ever wanted to become king. So let's not do incorrect information or there might be consequences. Okay?
I don't care.
Okay. That was just fun. That was just fun. Most of the time I'll be crapping on the presidents, but I've got to be honest. We've got to be sincere here, right? Time for grading. Now, just some clarification on our grading scale. Here's basically how it works. Of course, we're using American metrics, but there are some differences. The one difference is that from 0 to 20, we have added the category of F for anywhere under 20. If you're 20 and above, just to under 40, you are F-. And then anything till under 60 is an F. And then, of course, you have the regular grading system with D's, C's, B's, and A's. You know the gist. Of course, you see the chart. You get it. Now, let us go and grade George Washington. Now, I was very critical on George Washington, but perhaps I was being a little too harsh. Now, he was the first leader of the country, and as you know, there are many first leaders of other countries that did not do very well, and did a lot worse than Washington. The fact of the matter is, Washington was a great leader. Not a very good military leader, as we found out, but a great leader and a great orator, and made ultimately good decisions. The key achievement of his presidency was his cabinet, and understanding that those were the right people for that job. His cabinet, and it's like the saying in film, right? 90% of directing is casting, and that's exactly what he did. He casted the right people. So that is what I have to give credit to. And of course, there weren't too many problems, and it was pretty good. And as the TikTokers say, it was Gucci. As the American TikTokers, if I see any British TikTokers saying that, we're not gonna do that. No, that was a joke, right? But you get the idea. And I am a bit rambling, but overall, quite good. He owned slaves, which is bad to see, and made some poor decisions, but ultimately, I can't say he was too bad. Now, what is his grade? We use scientific metrics, completely proven by computational thinking. These are pure methods of complete logic and pure consequentialism to determine who will be, what his grade will be. You know what I mean? And George Washington, drum roll please, scored a 66.17, which is a D. Very, very good. I'm hearing the audience think that's bad. Do they? Well, if you think that's bad, then everything else is going to get a lot worse. 1796. Who was going to replace Washington? Who was going to become the second president of the United States? Well, we've got some pretty bold contenders. In the Democratic Republican camp, we have Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson. And in the Federalist camp, we have Vice President John Adams. John Adams, yes. Yeah, John Adams, yes, of course. And the winner was...
John Adams. I know him. That can't be. That's that little guy who spoke to me all those years ago. What was it, 85? That poor man, they're going to eat him alive. Oceans rise, empires fall. Next to Washington, they all look small. All alone, watch them run. They will tear each other into pieces. Jesus Christ, it will be fun.
John Adams, Federalist, 1797 to 1801, 61 years old, from Massachusetts. John freaking Adams.
He still wanted power, took power, and worked on repressing his political enemies.
In my opinion, what was so admirable about John Adams is that he didn't own slaves. Out of his founding era, he was the only one. John Adams was a lawyer, and he's also a very smart individual on a lot of levels. John Adams stood against the Matrix, stood against the deep state, and became our second president. Because there's no doubt today that he would have been a supporter of Donald Trump, and there's no doubt.
I also made a deal with John Adams, so yeah. I made a deal with him and I saw him in hell a few years later.
John Adams was another nitwit who rose to the presidency. I have to agree with the narrator this time. This is he's a joke. He's honestly a joke, and there's nothing really I can say about him because he sucked.
What can you say about John Adams besides the fact that he was a loser? He did not win. He did not carry on George Washington's legacy.
He was okay.
John freaking Adams. And his presidency was an absolute disaster. The John Adams presidency was honestly fascinating. And I'm just going to spoil it for you. He's a one-term president. I mean, obviously. Obviously right. And there's a reason why. Because John Adams' presidency was completely dominated by ego. In one way that makes John Adams my opposite. While he is an egomaniac, I am the most humble person on earth. Humble man on earth. And it's really interesting to see the differences between me and him because, John Adams, yes. John Adams. It's only quite interesting that he's even considered a founding father, but let's be fair to John Adams, you know? Let's give a background. Who the hell is John Adams? And how the hell did he become president?
John Adams was a grumpy, frumpy guy from Boston. He was a principled lawyer. He successfully defended the British soldiers involved in the Boston Massacre, and he was a relentless public servant. Adams was a leader in the Continental Congress, a diplomat to Europe, and the first vice president.
Yes, before John Adams became such a powerful person in government, he was always a very respected lawyer. He was an intellectual. And he viewed his intelligence as his crowning attribute. Unfortunately,
I don't know if I would agree. Yes. He was right ahead in the American Revolution, and he was just kind of there, to be honest. He became an important figure, but he didn't fight in the war, you know. He was an important diplomatic figure. He was going to France with Ben Franklin, and you can give him credit there, but ultimately, John Adams is very confusing. Now, Adams is in a very tough spot right now. How can he ever live up to Washington? How can he even live up to that? And how can he solve the problems that were created through the 1790s? And of course, the big problem that we went over is Britain and France. Britain or France? Who do we as a country side with? Now, as Mike said, the Federalists were like, let's go Britain. And the Democratic Republicans were like, let's go France. And the Trump supporters were like, let's go Brandon. But, yeah, the wrong episode. Sorry. But, obviously, John Adams is a Federalist. And he's like, let's go Britain. And do you know who's not very happy? France. And France is kind of crazy right now. You know, they're just out of their just insane period called the Reign of Terror, where they were literally chopping everybody's heads off. So you do not mess with France right now. You do not mess with France. And luckily, I can tell you, the United States did not go to war with France. But they kind of did. Let's explain the quasi-war.
The French keep attacking American ships. What shall I do? I must send smart diplomats to negotiate with French Foreign Minister Charles Maurice de Talleyrand Perigord. We are 3 smart diplomats. We want to negotiate. Please send us to France. My dream has come true. Surely Charles Pickney, John Marshall, and Elbridge Gerry will successfully negotiate. Well, what are you waiting for? Get to work. Consider it done, Mr. President. This is cool. Dude, we're like diplomats. Here come the foreign minister's representatives. Let us report to them as X, Y, and Z. So you want us to leave your ships alone? Yes, we do. How much? I'd say pretty much. Enough to offer us a bribe. Get lost, pal. France is a powerful country. You better pay. We'd rather fight an expensive war than pay you some stupid crime. We say millions for defense, not 1 cent for tribute. You'll be sorry. When Americans got word of how disrespectfully they'd been treated by the French, many wanted to go to war. George Washington was ready to come out of retirement to lead the army. Adams, however, tried further negotiation, and this time, France treated America seriously. The XYZ affair, so named because that's how Americans referred to the French representatives who demanded a bribe, showed the world that the United States demanded to be treated with respect.
Now, obviously, with this quasi-war with France and this whole XYZ affair, it's just a lot of people are not very confident in Adams. So what does poor Adams do? If you're not confident in Adams, go to jail. Go to jail. Yes, go to jail. Yes. He passes the Alien and Sedition Acts, which, I mean, basically means you can't criticize him.
You have been warned. There is nowhere to run. You will pay the price. I will take your life.
The Alien Sedition Acts are underrated. They're an important part of keeping all the radical views out of society and keeping American views in.
He did not put up with the press's bullshit. He did not put up with the press. He didn't.
he did not put up with the press. And he passed the Alien Sedition Acts to stop the press from telling lies to the American people. You have to respect that because the press has been a massive problem.
Now, the Alien Sedition Acts were obviously violations of the First Amendment, both in terms of freedom of the press and in freedom of speech. And the ultimate idea from Adams' point of view was to shield himself from criticism because he is, at the end of the day, an insecure man-child who couldn't handle criticism. Now, that was the real purpose, and pretty much everyone saw through it. Everyone saw through that was the purpose, and none more than the Democratic Republicans, who called him out fiercely on it. And basically, this idea, this act, completely backfires on John Adams. You try to get rid of criticism of your administration, but at the end of the day, you're getting more criticism because you have turned off. The press now dislikes you, and now the people dislike you, and it's going to be really hard if you ever want to even campaign again as Adams. So his popularity just plummets pretty severely. Not too bad because he still has popularity in the northern states, but he was already unpopular in the South. Now he is severely unpopular in the South.
You know, the most hilarious part about this whole situation is where the criticism was coming from, where the attacks on his character were coming from. They were coming from within his own administration, because if you didn't know, you could, if you read it, you would know this, but I'm going to assume most of you are illiterate. No, I won't go there, but if you read it, you would know this, but who was John Adams vice president? Well, it was none other than his rival, Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson. Within his own administration, fierce attacks were coming. Imagine being John Adams. And how did that happen? How did such a ridiculous thing happen where his rival is his vice president? He didn't want that, and of course he didn't. He didn't, and of course the VP is the only member of cabinet that cannot be fired, so how does this happen? Well, we have to explain the Electoral College. Now, here's how it works today.
The Electoral College currently consists of 538 electors, 1 for each member of Congress plus 3 for the District of Columbia. Each state is assigned a different allotment of votes based on how many people live there. In 48 states and D.C., the candidate winning the popular vote receives all that state's votes, the exceptions being Nebraska and Maine. Those 2 states assign 2 electoral votes to the winner of the state's overall popular vote and 1 to the winner of each congressional district's popular vote. For a candidate to win the presidency, they must secure at least 270 electoral votes, a majority of the 538.
So if that's how it worked today, then what was it like back then? Well, it was very similar. Obviously, some of the differences is that, of course, only the wealthy, white men, only wealthy white men, were able to vote. That's the one main difference. And the other main difference is the structure. Under the original plan, under the original system, each elector cast 2 votes for president. Electors did not vote for vice president, and whoever received a majority of these votes from electors would become president, with the person receiving the second most votes becoming vice president. Now you see the problem. Whoever gets the second most votes is going to be VP. And of course, Jefferson got the second most votes. So this obviously leads to problems. And everyone realized this, but it's only going to lead to more problems by the election of 1800. But aren't we getting a little ahead of ourselves? Oh wait, it's already 1800. That was very quick. For such a terrible president, that was surprisingly quick. It was almost laughable just how bad he was. And guess what, guys? It's a rematch. And the Federalist camp, we have President John Adams. President, I can't believe he's president. And of course, in the Democratic Republican camp, it is Vice President Thomas Jefferson. So, VP versus P, 1800. Who will win? This very interesting battle.
John Adams is a blind, bald, crippled, toothless man who wants to start a war with France. While he's not busy importing mistresses from Europe, he's trying to marry one of his sons to a daughter of King George. Haven't we had enough monarchy in America?
I'm Thomas Jefferson, and I approve this message because John Adams is a hideous, hermaphroditical character with neither the force and firmness of a man nor the gentleness and sensibility of a woman.
If Thomas Jefferson wins, murder, robbery, rape, adultery, and incest will be openly taught and practiced. The air will be rent with the cries of the distressed, the soil will be soaked with blood, and the nation black with crimes. Are you prepared to see your dwellings in flames, female chastity violated, children writhing on a pike?
I'm John Adams, and I approve this message because Jefferson is the son of a half-breed Indian squaw raised on hoe cakes, and Hamilton is a Creole bastard brat of a Scotch peddler.
As you can see, the election of 1800 was quite vulgar, very insults, but this is a family-friendly show, so we'll make sure that this vulgarness won't happen, and it's kind of not why we're not hearing from certain individuals, because we want to be family-friendly, but at the end of the day, everyone knows the result. I already spoiled it for you because it's quite obvious what's going to happen. Thomas Jefferson won. And it's not a landslide, as you can see, but it was a solid victory. And pretty important victory because it basically changes the landscape of politics in the United States for quite a while. Because up till now, the Federalists have been doing quite well. They've had a president, and now the Democratic Republicans. They've shifted power, and they will be in power for a while, as you will see. The Democratic Republicans, yes. Time for grating. Now you know the jig now, of course. These points mean this, and this means this, and you get the chart, of course. And hopefully by episode 3, is that too much to ask? You'll be able to memorize it. You'll know it's so down. You have plenty of weeks. That's your homework. You know, this could be used in classrooms. This is the greatest documentary of all time, of course. But yes, time for grating. John Adams. We're doing John Adams, yes. John Adams is terrible. Just very bad. Now, I'll get the good things out of the way. Of course, John Adams, there was a peaceful transfer of power. And I guess it's good that he formed the Navy, I guess. I mean, that's probably important to have if you're a nation, especially in the 19th century. But, yeah, other than that, what a man-child, what egotistical. What would the TikTokers call him? He would be called a beta male. He's just... He's just crap. I'm sorry. I'm like at a loss for words. Because the truth is, when you literally go after First Amendment rights, try to silence speech, that's one of the worst things you can do. And you've proven that ultimately your goal is tyranny. And he was a tyrant. He wanted Washington to be a tyrant. He's just... I don't need to even say anymore. Okay? You know, whatever. Peaceful transfer of power, I don't even care. Because we used scientific, computational metrics, completely objective. And we have determined, here is John Adams' score. Drum roll, please. A 25.98 out of 100. Giving him an F-. Let's move on, shall we, from that joke. Remember how I talked about the weird electoral college system back in the day? Well, the Democratic Republicans realized this, and they wanted a way so that John Adams wasn't VP and it wasn't stupid. So they tried to bypass it, right? Since they had 2 votes, right? One vote would be for Jefferson, and 1 vote would be for a new VP candidate. They chose Aaron Burr, as you know, and Aaron Burr is an important figure and a massive buffoon, but we'll get into that later. Basically, that happened. The idea was that we'd have 1 vote for Burr, 1 vote for Jefferson, and then exactly 1 more vote for Jefferson, so that the results were that Jefferson got the majority, and then Burr got the second place, and he would be VP. Unfortunately, their plan of having one more vote failed. It was a tie. They failed. They failed miserably. Very, very interesting. Very, very stupid. But yes, they failed very badly. They failed very badly. And it was a tie. So, if you don't know, if the presidency ends up in a tie in the Electoral College, it goes to the House of Representatives. And the one part of the election of 1800, that famous Hamilton song that is true, although it is not truly true, but what is true is that once Aaron Burr thought that he might have a shot of winning in the House of Reps, because he was just wanted to be VP, he didn't really care, but now he thought he might win, so he started campaigning hard, and he thought, maybe I can convince everybody to vote for me in the House of Representatives.
People are asking to hear my voice. The country is facing a difficult choice. If you were to ask me who I'd promote, Jefferson has my vote. I've never agreed with Jefferson once. We have fought on like 75 different fronts. But when all is said and all is done, Jefferson has beliefs, Burr has none.
It almost worked. But then Hamilton, as you see, he stepped in and said, you suck. Vote for Jefferson. I don't even like Jefferson, because we had our old banking issue, but vote for Jefferson. And this creates a tension between Burr and Hamilton for the next few years, and it ends with a bang, and I won't spoil it, but it's going to be quite interesting. But yes. So at the end of the day, we have Jefferson being elected as the third president of the United States, with his vice president Aaron Burr, who he now hates because he kind of got backstabbed by him. Yeah. Let us begin with Thomas Jefferson.
Thomas Jefferson, Democratic Republican, 1801 to 1809, 57 years old, from Virginia.
When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for a battle to commence, then kaplow, I hit him with the illness of my quill. I'm endowed with certain unalienable skills. Let me run down my resume, will ya? Set up a little place called the United States. Sound familiar? I told King George he could eat a fat dick. When it comes to declarations, I'm the first draft pick. I topple any tyrant, so kings and pirates beware. I'm so down with revolutions, I invented the swivel chair.
Thomas Jefferson was a visionary leader who showed people how to do things, who supported farmers, who supported the working individual on the ranch, on the people. He supported the voter base. He supported truth. And that is why I think Jefferson surpasses Adams. Thomas Jefferson was a bad president who set bad precedents, and there's just nothing much to even discuss when it comes to him, because although he said he supported farmers, he didn't support the people that actually made money for the farmers, the slaves. Thomas Jefferson was the founder, the author of the Declaration of Independence, which allowed the United States to become its own nation. And although it's a lot more trivial, and I'm not entirely in favor of the United States as a whole and what it was founded on, I think this led to great things overall, and I am proud to be an American, and you have to respect Thomas Jefferson for that, and also being very much ahead of his time when it comes to civil rights.
Brilliant president, brilliant conservative, almost as good as George Washington.
Thomas Jefferson was a really despicable man who slept with his slaves and had children with them. The Declaration of Independence is real close to my heart. The pursuit of justice, peace, happiness, all that good stuff. Those were glory days for America.
Despite his loud and rambunctious portrayal in the Lin-Manuel Miranda's musical Hamilton, in reality, Thomas Jefferson was a very quiet and soft individual who had a bit of trouble sometimes public speaking. He's a great writer, but ultimately not the best public speaker. Although he didn't fight in the Revolutionary War, he helped get France involved, which was definitely important. So there's no doubt in calling him a founding father. Here's the truth. Thomas Jefferson was kind of, I want to use proper language here, but Thomas Jefferson was degenerate filth. Now, for all of Adams' faults, of course he didn't own slaves, and for all of Washington's faults, although he owned plenty, it wasn't anything compared to the amount of slaves Thomas Jefferson owned. Everyone knows the massive slave enterprise of Monticello, but this is how much. Yeah, that is how many slaves he owned. That is ludicrous. That is insane. But what makes it worse is Thomas Jefferson knew what he was doing. You can't say, oh, it was common for the time, who cares? If you say that, if you say this, for example, he had slaves because it was good. My response is this.
Will you shut up? Shut the hell up.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense because if you do any research, you would know that Thomas Jefferson knew that slavery was wrong. He spoke out against it. He wrote out against it plenty of the time. Yet he still had so many slaves. And now that the cotton gin's around, it's getting more profitable.
So, here's the thing, okay? I think slavery really needs to stop. I think it's time for us to, as a nation, move on. Slavery is a cruel process. And, hey, do we have the import of the new slaves at Monticello? Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. We're gonna exploit them for all their labor. Yeah. So, slavery is really bad, unless I make money from it.
Thomas Jefferson helped support slave culture, and slavery is only going up. You know, what he ended up doing later in his administration, what he's going to end up doing, and there's a push for this, so it's more of a political move, but it's to stop the import of new slaves from Africa. To stop the slave trade. Now, that doesn't mean there's still no slave trade going on. There's still a lot of trade trade. But it's more black market at this point, and it's illegal. But it does stop it in a wide variety. It still doesn't stop slavery. It's still going to grow. Because they mated slaves. Slaves have more children now. The slave number is only going to go up. The slaves are here. They're just going to have children, and there are more slaves. You don't change anything by doing that. In fact, you're making it worse, and you're creating an incentive for slave masters to force breed slaves. This is like factory farming, but with humans. That's what's going on. Thanks to this piece of crap, Thomas Jefferson, I apologize for the vulgarity, the language there.
Now, one of the biggest scandals in the Jefferson presidency, of course, was the Sally Hemings situation. What basically happened is Sally Hemings is one of Jefferson's slaves, many slaves, but he ends up sleeping with her and they have a child. Now, although he tried to cover it up, the truth ended up coming to light, as of course legendary Californian doorman once said.
What happens in the dark always comes to light. I know.
Although he tried to cover it up, he was only successful to an extent. And the situation was bad because he slept with a slave. Oh, not only did he sleep with Sally Hemings, he raped Sally Hemings like the aristocratic pig he was. Now, as you see, the deep state matrix agent known as the communist, of course, he's a communist and communists are bad, and he's trying to spread this lie that Sally Hemings was raped, which is just a lie. Where is the evidence of this? This was a consensual relationship. And it shows you that they're going to slander them no matter what. They're going to take down their statues, and they're going to try to erase our history, as they're doing to literally every president. Sally Hemings was not raped. There is no evidence for this. This is ridiculous and stupid. Now, Jack, you call me an agent of the deep state and the matrix, but in reality, if anything is anyone's a deep state agent, it is you who is just promoting racist conspiracy theories. Because at the end of the day, yes, it was rape. It was rape. When you have power imbalance, when you have someone literally owning someone, and they have sex with the person they own, there's no actual say in who actually has to have sex. Like, you have to have sex. That is abuse of power. And by extension, rape. You cannot, it's just, the power imbalance is there. You don't have a choice if you're Sally Hemings. Now, you actually understood this and wasn't an agent of capitalism, you would know this, but of course, you are not, and you are ridiculous. And here's the thing, I have only a few words for you. Here's what I have to say. This is what I have to say.
Fuck you! No, cover up this whole Sally Hemming situation. I made a deal with Thomas Jefferson, and that whole situation was covered up, and we were good. We were good, and I saw him in hell a few decades later.
It's important to understand what he was going for and why he did do the things he did.
His idea was to make the government smaller, lower taxes, shrink the military, and make it possible for America to become a bucolic, agrarian empire of liberty, rather than an English-style, industrial, mercantile nightmare landscape. So how did he do? Well, really well at first. Jefferson got rid of all the taxes except for the tariff, especially the whiskey tax, and then, when he woke up with a terrible, cheap whiskey-induced hangover, he paid off part of the national debt, he shrunk the army and the navy, and basically made sure that America wouldn't become a centralized English-style state for at least the next 60 years. Low taxes and small government sounds great, but no navy? That would be tough, especially when we needed ships and marines to fight the Barbary pirates on the shores of Tripoli, who kept capturing our ships in the Mediterranean and enslaving their crews. This is yet another example of how foreign affairs keeps getting in the way of domestic priorities. In this case, the domestic priority of not wanting to spend money on a navy.
So he was able to slow down the government growth to a bit. So what happens when you can do something that is really good for both yourself and the country, but goes against your ideology, something that expands government? Well, that goes again to the biggest accomplishment in the Jefferson presidency, and ultimately his biggest failure as well, the Louisiana Purchase. So, what was the problem with the Louisiana Purchase? This sounds like a sweet deal. You get plenty of land for not that much money. Very fair deal. Good relationship with France now that Napoleon's in charge. You're chilling with France, and although there are still problems, we're okay. We're okay, right? What is the problem here? Well, and why is this so controversial at the time? It's not constitutional. It is not constitutional at all. It is not constitutional. Nowhere in the Constitution does it ever say the president has any authority to buy land for the country. Many Democratic Republicans jumped on this. We're going to shrink government, right? We can't allow government to purchase heaving bits of land. It's a slippery slope. And Jefferson was, honestly, he didn't know what to say. But guess what? When given the choice between your stupid, rubbish ideology and gaining a bunch of good, green, beautiful land, the Louisiana Territory, the beauty of it, the pure beauty of it, he chose Louisiana. And honestly, it was the right decision. But it caused a trend. The government's never going to shrink. Even if you say the government's going to shrink, it's never going to shrink. Everyone who says that they're going to shrink the government just makes it bigger. Everyone who says the government's going to be bigger makes it even bigger. And from now on, the government will continue to be bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. It's going to continue to be bigger. And his dream of this small agrarian society, of small government, the dream, it's over before it even started. But anyway, we have Louisiana, and we got to explore Louisiana. So, let's meet our good friends, Lewis and Clark.
It was 1804, not a day before, we left our homes and families. For 3 long years and lots of tears, we wandered through the land. We had no plan to show the way, but to a man we're glad to say, the road was long, but like this song we're back. We are Lewis and Clark. That's Clark and Lewis.
It's been a while since we checked on our resident time traveler, Jake. It's been a few decades, actually. Jake, asking you, what are your thoughts?
How the hell does this goddamn camera have infinite freaking battery life? Like, seriously? So yeah, Thomas Jefferson.
just bought Louisiana from France. And that's where I am with like 20th freaking century technology. The hell? Wait, has this painting even come out yet? Dude, historical realism. You made me a freaking time capsule, but it's not even a freaking time capsule. It's the opposite of a goddamn time capsule. So you said all this future stuff, and I mean, I'm appreciative of it, but once again, I'm not recording for you. Screw you, narrator. I'm freaking Jake Magone. Shut up.
Lewis and Clark are actually at your door right now.
They're knocking on my door. Goddamn freaking Lewis and Clark. Am I gonna be the reason why freaking Lewis killed himself? I'm gonna be the reason, dude. Actually, I'm not, because I'm not a bad person, unlike you. Or even a person I don't even goddamn know. Well, yeah. Screw you, Lewis. Get the hell out of here.
Jake, please do not use such vulgar language. We're trying to keep this family friendly, and your potty mouth just goes off the curb. So fuck you.
Now, in an era of expanding, now in massive European imperialism, now it becomes a very good question. Now, I wonder, why did now Napoleon sell? Now,
Look, you're taking up a lot of time, Mike. Do you have a stutter? Is that what's going on? Do you really have a stutter on this documentary?
So, I would like to note that I do not stutter, and even if I did, I don't really see the problem with it, but I don't, and this is just how I talk. I've actually not been gifted a script. The planning for this was very badly done, and...
No, honestly, I'm sick of your whining and blabbering, okay? We have an audience here that's watching this. Please be respectful. Please be respectful. You're honestly, please do not waste time, okay? We have a job to do.
I have made a severe and continuous lapse in my judgment, and I do not expect to be forgiven. I apologize severely. I'm really sorry for the disruption.
No, Thomas Jefferson's first term has been going rather smoothly. And it's a very solid first term, don't get me wrong, but there was a few problems. And it's not really his fault, because you know how we talked about Aaron Burr before? Yeah, Aaron Burr was not only indecisive, but he was an opportunist. The fact of the matter is, he was the worst vice president of the United States ever. He was. We're not even 3 presidents in, and we already have the worst vice president. Although we're not grading vice presidents, maybe another time we'll grade vice presidents. Maybe episode 9. Do you want to grade vice presidents? Comments down below. Not really, I don't care. I'm going to do whatever I want to do. But you know the deal. Aaron Burr just was a disaster. And I mean, it was such a disaster that he became vice president that they had to... they passed the 12th Amendment, of course. They passed the 12th Amendment, and Mike could explain that.
In simple terms, the 12th Amendment requires the person to receive a majority of the electoral votes for vice president for that person to be elected vice president by the Electoral College. And if no candidate for vice president has the majority of total votes, the Senate, with each senator having only one vote, chooses the vice president.
What happens during his tenure as vice presidency? He does something absolutely insane. He murders someone. He murders Alexander Hamilton. He murders. And in the words of Harold Martin IV, murder is against the law. So yeah, but he gets away with it because he's VP, you know? Yeah, that's how it is. That's how it is.
Now, the duel between Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr was very different than when it was portrayed in the musical Hamilton. It was not really fought over personal issues. They actually really, before the events leading up to the duel, they did not have a very close relationship at all, the two figures, unlike it was portrayed in the musical. It was focused on really politics and very different political views. Now, eventually we all know the result of the duel. Hamilton, of course, dies, but it does not go over well for Aaron Burr. You've now just killed a very popular political figure. And even with the sex scandals,
If I can prove that I never touched my balls, will you promise not to tell another soul what you saw?
even with the corruption, even with the elitism that was Alexander Hamilton, even so, like, he remained very popular with the public, very popular, I mean, war hero, very good friend of George Washington. Like, there was, you screwed it up.
You done messed up, Aaron!
And you made the administration look bad because you're vice president. You make Thomas Jefferson, who doesn't like you very much. Yes, Jefferson does not like Burr very much. Of course, we know the reason why Burr is VP. It's only because of the disastrous system that was set in place. Of course, that's not going to be set in place because of the 12th Amendment, as we went over. And it just looks very bad for Jefferson. But the funny thing is this whole scandal with the duel between him and Hamilton is not really the craziest thing Aaron Burr has done. No, it's going to get a lot worse for Aaron Burr in the coming years because, believe it or not, what's very unknown about Aaron Burr is that Aaron Burr was committed treason against the United States and tried to become king of Mexico.
Yes, Mike is correct. Aaron Burr tried to become king of Mexico. Now, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but this is the thing that ultimately they got Aaron Burr for. The Burr Conspiracy was a plot that was planned by Aaron Burr in the years during and after his term as Vice President of the United States. And according to the accusations, which have been mostly proven true, he attempted to use his international connections and support from a cabal of U.S. planters, politicians, and an army officers to establish an independent country in southwestern United States and parts of Mexico. He tried to create his own country. Yes. Now, ultimately, Aaron Burr was acquitted of these charges because there was lack of evidence, but everyone knew he did it, so he had to flee in Europe. Aaron Burr was the worst founding father ever. The worst. And he was not VP for more than one term. You know, he was replaced. And you know something really interesting? Aaron Burr was such a bad VP. Aaron Burr was such a bad vice president that his replacement, and I'm just going to search this up for you. This is his replacement. Yeah, that's his freaking replacement. And to be fair, Aaron Burr might be the worst vice president ever, and probably our worst founding father, but when it comes to bad VPs, and even treasonous VPs, there are plenty more to come, because the world of VPs it's a whole different ballgame. So here we are, 1804, and honestly, very good start to the Thomas Jefferson presidency. Now, I talked about him being a freaking slave owner and degenerate filth, and it's true. But what can you expect? What can you expect? This is the third president. It's honestly not that bad. Really, it's not that bad. It's honestly a very good start. Let's say that. Jefferson's presidency starts very well. So, he gets reelected, and it's honestly a landslide. Now Aaron Burr is out of the picture, and, yeah. And we begin Thomas Jefferson's second term. Ah, yes. Right in the middle of the Lewis and Clark expedition, the second term begins, and it's terrible. It's terrible. Yeah, it's rubbish, is what I should say. It is garbage. A big problem that is very close to exploding that I went over, that is left from the Washington presidency, but it's France and Britain, the conflict. And can the US remain neutral? The fact of the matter is it can't. And the US remains neutral. Now, although it leaned in Adams towards the British, and in Jefferson it's leaning towards the French, it's just not good enough for the French and the British. They're going through their own war, the Napoleonic War, and you're going to have to pick sides. The fact of the matter is, this war is ramping up. It is ramping up in Jefferson's second term, and it's not looking good. You can't remain neutral forever. And so ships are being seized. Assets are being seized. Trading ships are being seized. Everything is going downhill. So what do you do? What do you do if you're Jefferson? How do you maintain neutrality. When France doesn't like it when you trade with the British, and Britain doesn't like it when you trade with the France. So what do you do? What do you do here? What do you do? What would you do? Let's do it Who Wants to Be a Millionaire style. What does Jefferson do? A, he sides with the British. B, he sides with the French. And C, he just resigns. Or D, he stops trading altogether. Now, it has to be, probably one A or B, right? Right? Because, there's no way you stop trading, right? You stop trading. You stop trading. Yes, it is D. The Embargo Act of 1807 literally stopped all trade. There is no trade. There is no foreign trade now.
Don't even get this whole documentary started. We'll round the whole people up. We'll round everyone up to tell you why it's just bad on every level. Well, tariffs on general are usually pretty bad, but this example is even worse because when you cut off all trade, not only are you hurting your own citizens, but you're making other countries quite mad, especially with the want for supply of the southern cotton. So by not taking a side in this whole French-British conflict, you have made France and Britain even madder, and the only thing they're commonly united at is you.
So all the Matrix deep state agents here seem to think that the Embargo Act of 1807 was terrible. But it's because, of course, they're paid off. And the reality is protectionism is a good thing and has been supporting our country. We have to have American-made goods, American-made jobs. And the Embargo Act of 1807 strengthened America, and we should have kept it. Because honestly, we can't have these Chinese goods as China controls our country, and we're going to go bankrupt, and they're going to buy us, and we'll all be slaves to the Chinese. It's going to happen in 10 years, because that is the plot of the New World Order. You know it. They've been all calling it out. Whether it be Trump, whether it be Tate, whether it be other legends out there. They're calling it out, and you're just not listening because you're sheep. No, surprisingly enough, I actually have to agree with Jack here, which is crazy to say, man. It kind of disgusts me on the inside, but he's absolutely right. I mean, you can't allow yourself to be controlled by multinational trade. You have to keep things in a cellular area. And although it was done for the wrong reasons, the Embargo Act of 1807 is widely over-dramatized by critics who are honestly just losers and capitalist pigs who just like free trade because then they get to outsource their labor to countries where they enslave people like Apple does to workers in China. I mean, it's really no surprise here, and all you losers that say it's bad are just failures at the end of the day.
The reality is protectionism doesn't work, and it leads to economic destruction, as we saw. There's no defending the Embargo Act, and people need to really think about this deeply and read actual novels and go to college like actual intellectuals and not fake grifters.
What an absolute disaster. Economically, financially, everything goes downhill. This is the worst mistake Jefferson ever made. Slavery is one thing, and of course, slavery, whatever. But you're gonna ban all trade? What are you doing? What are you doing? Oh my god, oh my, I'm not going to use vulgar language, unlike loser Jake McGowan, but wow. And guess what, guys? The Lewis and Clark expedition comes home, and as Jake previously said, yes, Meriwether Lewis kills himself. So, good job, Thomas Jefferson. Thanks a lot. Yep, Embargo Act, yeah. So, yep, his second term was down here. His first term was good, and then his second term is piss. Time for grading. Now, the metrics, you know this is the chart. And let's just get started. Thomas Jefferson's a very complicated figure. And we've been very critical of him, but we've also given him some praise. So, how does that all balance out of this whole scale? Because, in one hand, he was quite hypocritical. You can't be against slavery, but then owning slaves and benefiting off slaves. That's just the fact. And it's just not a good look. Monticello,
really? Against slaves. Had a whole denouncing of slaves, but you own them. Yeah, it doesn't look good in that regard. And the Embargo Act of 1807 is terrible, because you can't get rid of trade. It's just not a good idea, and it is completely worthless. His second term wasn't very good. There's just no other way to say it. But despite the controversy, the Louisiana Purchase was brilliant. You doubled your size of your whole nation, and that's an accomplishment. Jefferson was able to lead it, and through his first term, I can give him credit. We were able to keep the country together in the first transition of power, and that's very important. So how does this all balance out? On one hand, he was crap. On one hand, he was good. So how does how does our objective metrics determine his score? Well, it is perfectly balanced, as all things should be. Thomas Jefferson scored a 50.00 out of 100 and gets a score of F. It is the second highest in our metric so far. Seems bad, but almost double Adams' score, so you can give him that. In 1808, Jefferson continues the tradition Washington started and steps down after 2 terms. So, the country is once again at a crossroads. Who will become president? The first time since 1796 there's no incumbent, so who can step up to the table? Well, like Washington, Jefferson also had a quite good cabinet. And sure, Aaron Burr in his first term was trash, and I'll laugh about Aaron Burr forever. I said trash again, oh my god. But putting that aside, there's one member of his cabinet that is very important. His Secretary of State. James Madison. The Democratic Republicans nominate James Madison. Now, we talked about James Madison earlier. He wrote a bunch of the Federalist Papers. He also is considered by many the father of the Constitution. When it comes to actually doing the nuts and crannies of this Constitution, you could call him the father of the Constitution. So, the Democratic Republicans have a strong opponent. But then again, the Embargo Act of 1807 has kind of screwed everything up for the country. So, maybe the Federalists have a chance this time. So they choose Charles Cotesworth Pinckney. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that name correctly, but I don't even care. Because, honestly, there's no real... I mean, it wasn't a landslide, but, at the end of the day, we know who won this one. It was James Madison. And James Madison went on to become the 4th President of the United States of America. And oh boy, this is going to be a weird ride, because everything is about to go downhill very, very fast.
James Madison, Democratic Republican, 1809 to 1817, 57 years old, from Virginia.
There's no doubt denying James Madison wasn't a great president. There just is no doubt saying that.
James Madison is the father of our Constitution, and a Constitution is something I hold sacred.
Unlike the superb musical Hamilton, James Madison was one of our shortest presidents, but that didn't stop him from being one of our most significant.
James Madison, another agent of the elite that held lavish parties, not caring that many people were poor. And, that's just common, honestly. Who cares at this point? But that just happened, and no one seemed to talk about it because they are all blind.
He was an idiotic president.
Disgrace. James Madison, the father of our Constitution, which is sad because our Constitution disenfranchised women, disenfranchised slaves.
Now, I got to give a lot of credit to James Madison because he started his presidency with a bang, with a very good thing. Very good. He repealed the Embargo Act. Thank goodness. Thank goodness that he repealed that terrible piece of legislation. So yes, the Embargo Act was repealed in his first term, but unfortunately the damage had already been done. And things were just being more hostile. Britain was starting to think, we can always retake the US, right? Now, of course, they were dealing with their own problems, the Napoleonic Wars, as you very well know. But it's starting to look good. And eventually, Eventually it might be necessary. But before we get into the big event of James Madison's presidency, let's talk about his personality. Let's talk about him as a person. And to start us off, let's talk about his favorite food. Now, Madison and Dolly were of course famous for their parties and also being big fans of ice cream. And I'm also a very big fan of ice cream as well. You know, it's a nice texture. And back then only the very wealthy could afford ice cream, and it tastes like wealth. It tastes like power. It tastes like I'm better than you. And I might be better than you. But that's okay. It's okay. It really is. Quite good. Quite good.
Now, in my humble opinion, I think James Madison is a very inspirational figure to many, because not only did he, of course, be the father of the Constitution, as he's called, but it's also important to remember that James Madison stood at only 5'4", and for presidents to be that short is very rare. Even back then, most presidents are about 6 foot. Like, it's you can't command respect as much when you're shorter, and he was able to do that, and he's been made fun of it for it, but he didn't let that stop him. And you got to think about that. I don't have any body. I'm only a voice anymore, and it gives me hope that maybe one day I can escape this hellhole.
So the first few years of James Madison's presidency is filled with parties and ice cream. So how does it all explode? How does the big event happen? What is the big event? What is the big bang? What is the important thing that happens? Well, it's a war. Yeah, it's a war, guys. It's a war. Now, you probably know about it. Most of you should know about it. If you don't know about it, you're a waste of time, honestly. But but then again, this is educational. So honestly, and this is family friendly. So we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about this constructively. What happens? Well, we've been talking about France and Britain and the massive amount of pressure that's been put on the US over these many decades. We've been talking about it a lot. How does it explode? Well, it's just too much. Eventually Britain, sometimes France is doing it more, sometimes Britain is doing it more, but especially Britain now. You're seizing US sailors. You're doing this, you're doing that, and the US is starting to get very mad. Madison's starting to get very mad. So it's 1812, right? It's 1812. And, you have a choice, right? What do we do? Ultimately, the US has picked sides. We'll side with France. We're going to invade Canada. Yeah, we're going to invade Canada. US started the War of 1812. They declared war, and they invaded Canada. Now, were they successful? No. No, they were not successful. It was an absolute disaster. And honestly, the United States is very lucky that the UK, the United Kingdom, was so preoccupied with Napoleon at this time. Because if they weren't, the US would not exist today. The United States of America would not exist today. Fortunately, it does. But, that's how it goes. The War of 1812 has begun. This is the first war since the Revolutionary War. And can the United States survive? Spoiler alert, they do. Spoiler alert, it does. But it's not very pretty. Not very pretty at all. Despite Madison's absolutely absurd war, unfortunately, for the Federalists, they just can't challenge him because the Federalist Party has been going on such a downturtle from 1800. We talked about this. But Democratic-Republican power has only been going up, and Federalist power is only going down. The Federalists have just kind of lost all their steam. And this is the person who challenges James Madison in 1812. This guy, really, that's the best they could do. Yeah. James Madison easily wins re-election during the middle of the war. And this war is not going to go good for the United States. Well, in Britain, the War of 1812 is nothing more than a cliff note. In America, it's huge and it's a big impact.
Because the UK struck at the core. The British Empire struck at the core of America. They went in to Washington, D.C. The city we talked about earlier, the compromise we talked about earlier. And since John Adams lived in the White House for a little bit period of time, of course, and then Jefferson, and then Madison, right? That's where he lives. The British came into Washington, D.C. and burnt down the White House. They burnt it down. They burnt the whole thing down. They burnt it down. Honestly, a lot of American culture and history could have been lost, by the way. You know the famous painting of George Washington? It was rescued by Dolly Madison, one of the only things that was rescued. The war was on. The war was on. And it was now kill or be killed. Because there's a good chance now the United States will not see another day.
And yes, I did make a deal with James Madison to preserve his presidency as he screwed up with his war. So yeah, I made a deal with him. Very nice, and it was good seeing him later. I don't know if he regretted it, because it's too short for me to see his eyes to know if he regretted it. So I guess we'll never know.
Despite the British absolutely dominating the American forces, the problem was they couldn't allow and lend all their resources to this conflict. Sure, they could defend their colonies, and they did it there effectively. But they couldn't reconquer America. Because not only was that expensive on its own right, but they were dealing with their own conflict in Europe. The Napoleonic Wars were insanely expensive, and it was life or death. Napoleon was doing very well at this time, and if it weren't for some critical blunders, there's a good chance he would have completely just continued being the powerhouse of Europe, and Britain was just gonna explode economically. Complode, explode. You know the words I'm trying to go here, right? So, even so, they just couldn't lend too much money to this conflict. So eventually, as the many years go by, and America still continues to defend itself, they agree to a treaty. They go to Belgium. They send a guy called James Monroe, Secretary of State, and we have a treaty. And we agree to a peace deal. And yeah, the United States did it. They were not conquered. That's the good news. The bad news is they were absolutely humiliated. They were absolutely humiliated. Yes, very, very much so. The British definitely won the War of 1812. That's absolutely true. But it's not always just about winning or losing. Sometimes it's a bit more complicated than that. Because although the British won the War of 1812, I don't think the Americans lost the War of 1812. They didn't win. I mean, this sounds very confusing, right? It sounds very confusing in your little mind. But what I'm trying to say, right, is if you stand up to a bully, for example, and even if the bully pushes you back down, they'll go and prey on weaker targets. They'll just leave you alone because it's too much of a challenge. Sure, they won. But it's too much of a challenge. And it makes you safer. And that's kind of what happened to the United States. It made them safer. It solidified their place. Still very weak, still very fragile, but safer, nonetheless. And the greatest moment is, after the treaty is signed, that secures peace. Back then, of course, news traveled very slowly, very leisurely. So a lot of people continued fighting even after the war was done. Even after the war was done, people were still fighting. One of them is a general by the name of Andrew Jackson. Now, I want to hear more from this guy, Andrew Jackson, but basically, he frees New Orleans from British control. The Battle of New Orleans. Very, very important event. Because it makes Andrew Jackson a war hero, and we're going to hear more from Jackson. It also gives the U.S. the last laugh in this war. And so Madison definitely failed deeply when it comes to this war, because you don't just invade Canada, he handled it very poorly. And when you handle a war poorly, you're poor. But at the same time, to be able to allow us not to completely get stumped. But then again, he also tried to leave troops into battle and failed miserably. He makes Washington look like a good military commander. Terrible commander-in-chief, probably one of the worst commander-in-chiefs of all the presidents.
Sorry. It's kind of hard to stand as tall as this table. It's pretty tall, unfortunately. So, I'm reaching the camera. But, yeah, okay. Basically explain how great of a military strategist I am, actually. And people are saying I'm not. Well, guess what, baby? I'm gonna show you with the game of freaking kings, dude. Okay, I'm gonna play a game right now, baby. Look, I'm black. Okay, play c4. Let's go e5. Okay, he plays queen h5. Okay. He looks like he's kind of going in my business. Trying to take my freaking pawn. Let's play knight c6. We defend the freaking pawn. Okay, he plays bishop c4. I don't really know what he's doing. It's clear that he's just not as genius as me. Okay, so we're gonna play knight f6, and we're gonna attack his quick. Hey, he was cheating. He broke the freaking rules, and it's unacceptable. We can't let this video get out to the public. Dude, we can't. And by the way, I'm actually 6 foot tall. This table is actually just 14 feet, okay?
But that was James Madison, and as the war is wrapping up, James Madison's term comes to a close. Time for grading. Now, of course, you know this means this, and the metrics mean this, and this is the graph, and I hope you're able to get this down, as I said, by episode 3, or you might die, or I might dye your clothes. In purple dye, you know, because like red and blue, you know, red and blue, yeah, that makes purple. But going on to bring overall James Madison's presidency to a close, I'm just not very impressed, to be honest, you know, and I mean, I'm not usually impressed in Americans, but James Madison just, as a father of the Constitution, you expect him to be better. But I can't say there's much good to say other than a bad war, the War of 1812. And in one way, conflict was inevitably going to happen. There's not much you can do about it, but it could have been handled better than invading Canada. And why would you invade Canada? It's ultimately kind of a shame that the British didn't win in 1812, isn't it? But, maybe that's just the Brit in me speaking out. But at the end of the day, he didn't lose the war. I mean, it wasn't a loss or a win, really. And at the end of the day, it's just what it is. He's a complicated figure, just like Jefferson, but he screwed up very deeply. And although I like his first term, I'm not a fan of his second term. And I'm not even a fan of his first term, to be honest. I'm pretty bad, but I'm going to give his constitutional qualifications and give him some leeway, and also give him some leeway because he's still number 4 of our presidents. After computational scientific metrics, we're able to determine that James Madison scores a 41.30 out of 100, landing him just barely in F category. Yeah. Quite bad. You honestly ruined my life, so I'm just going to say the opposite of what you say. James Madison is the GOAT of presidents. Screw you. The hair style is better than yours. Get out of my sight. I have no interest in your crap. And I'm not reporting on you. God damn it. Freaking British piece of shit. In 1816, Madison obviously chooses not to run again. Of course, that's just not going to happen. But so we come into a crossroads. We come to another crossroads. And can the Federalists finally win? No. The Federalists have almost completely dissolved at this point, but they come together and get Angus King. So we've come to Angus King versus James Monroe, the Secretary of State that ended the War of 1812. Angus King is better. Angus King is better because you're a piece of crap. You know, you sent your guys down here telling me that you can't freaking swear. They're freaking like on my door. Like you making freaking Disney Channel show? Like, what's going on? Like hear this.
Disrespectful. Stop using the F word.
I'm gonna swear all I want.
Platform.
I'm not reporting for you crap.
Stop.
Why is this phone not even run out of battery life? In the
It's
30 goddamn
disrespectful.
years
Stop
I've been here!
using.
The battle of the century. Who will win? And yeah, it's James Monroe. Everyone expected that. So time for President number 5. James Monroe. Democratic Republican. 1817 to 1825. 58 years old. From Virginia.
He was okay, I guess. Nowhere near as good as George Washington, to be honest.
All you can say about James Monroe is the Monroe Doctrine, which is all about dominance over the Western Hemisphere and Latin America. And you can look at the many dozens of U.S. military and economic excursions in Latin America to see what a disaster James Monroe was to us all. The Monroe Doctrine is holy to me. America is the most important country in the world, and Western Hemisphere is best protected by a strong America, and we wouldn't have had that without the Monroe Doctrine and James Monroe.
James Monroe is the perfect example of a masculine man. He wasn't a beta pussy. He wasn't a liberal sissy. He was masculine, and he was a war hero, and he became president because he respected people, and he actually gave it down. Unlike the Matrix and the Deep State, who are trying to control you by making the frogs gay, and you gotta listen to Alex Jones about this, but even though they slandered him, he says a lot of true stuff, and James Monroe was an ass president as usual, ass president. I'm not much of a fan of James Monroe when it comes to his racist policies, and once again, another slaveholder. And you can forgive it to a certain point, but when you're having slave owners this much, you've got to look at the American voters who support this stuff, and you got to look at the presidents, because slavery is an evil institution and needs to end very soon. But you have to respect the process, and you have to respect that things take time. So slavery is not always going to end immediately, and that's okay, because it's all about patience, and it's all about allowing the system to work, because there's a reason it was developed a certain way. So slavery will end, you just have to be patient. And it will end eventually, of course. And there isn't too big of a consequence.
And to those wondering, yes, I did make a deal with James Monroe.
James Monroe's presidency was called the Era of Good Feelings because it was rather stable.
James Monroe continues the tradition of Founding Father presidents, but he will be the last one to continue that tradition because all the Founding Fathers are either dead or getting quite old. At this time, he himself is already in his late 50s and through his presidency into his early 60s. He was only a teenager when he fought in the Revolutionary War. Of course, it was kind of unknown. Is that famous painting of Washington crossing the Delaware? You can actually see him on the right, as he is holding the flag. So it's definitely a transforming era. It's more of the same, but it's the calm before the storm, and a lot of stuff is going to go down because after Monroe's gone, it's like a tidal wave. But until then, it's the era of good feelings.
During James Monroe's presidency, we see the emergence of an idea that has slowly been creeping up. We've seen this in areas when it comes to America invading Canada, when it comes to Louisiana Purchase, but it's starting to be fully represented. And this is such an important idea, especially in next episode. It's called Manifest Destiny. The idea that America has a God-given right to expand westward along the North American continent, to keep expanding. And this idea continues. But not only are we going westward, we're going plenty of places. One of the most important things Monroe did was acquiring Florida in 1819. Now, this was already settled by a lot of American settlers, but Spain just could not control it. It was a swampy land. It was a liability for them, so they sold it to the United States. And now they've acquired Florida. And as we go westward, and as more people are going westward, more states are being made. And this is where we come to something that we talked about earlier. The North-South divide. Now, we've been kind of preoccupied with other things, but now we can fully focus on the true problem with this divide. Because it's only growing. It's only getting worse. If any northern state or free state, or any southern state or slave state, if there's a majority of any of these states, this can be a problem for the other side. If there's a majority slave states, for example, slavery could be ratified as constitutional and could be forever kept in the Constitution, and very unlikely to be repealed for a long period of time. If northern states, free states, got a majority, slavery could be outlawed, which is not good for the Southerners. So this creates disputes, and it creates problems when new states are trying to be admitted into the Union, because the whole idea here is we're trying to admit a lot of the states from the Louisiana Purchase into the Union. And we come to 1820, and we have Missouri. Missouri wants to join the Union. Now, Missouri wants to be a slave state. So there's a few important things to talk about when it comes to Missouri. Missouri's kind of north, and, the North is kind of like, slave state, this is kind of, we don't really want this. And it would get the whole thing off balance. If you admit Missouri into the Union as a slave state, there's more slave states. So the Union says, okay, here's the crutch of the compromise. It comes in two parts. One, if you're admitting Missouri, we're admitting our own state. Now, there's this region of Massachusetts that's completely disconnected from it. It's now called Maine. So we're going to create a state. We're going to carve Massachusetts, and we're going to create a new state called Maine. So now we have two states, one free state, one slave state. So now we've balanced. And the other idea behind the Missouri Compromise is basically saying any state below Missouri, going westward, if you're below Missouri, you can be a slave state. But if you're above, you have to be a free state. And that was the compromise. And it creates a tradition. Because if we're going to prevent any conflict from arising from this, we're just going to compromise and kick the can down the road. Unfortunately, there's only so far you can kick the can down the road, and the Missouri Compromise can only go so far. Because there are many more compromises to follow. And it only gets worse. Wait, it's 1820. You mentioned it was 1820. I mentioned it was 1820. It's an election year. Oh, this is going to be juicy. This is going to be juicy. Who is James Monroe's challenger? Who is James Monroe's challenger for the presidency? And I have an answer. James Monroe's challenger is... Drumroll, please. Nobody. Nobody? Yeah. Nobody is challenging James Monroe. He's going uncontested. Remember earlier when I asked you to place your bets and which of these presidents is going to go uncontested, just like Washington? Well, if you guessed Monroe, you would be correct. And you are a genius, almost as genius as me. Just kidding. I am not. I am very humble. That is a joke. But just saying, yes, he goes uncontested. That is insane. No president goes uncontested after this, by the way. There are landslides. There are landslide elections. Some landslides are so big, it makes you want to rethink your life if you are losing to a landslide that big. But no one goes uncontested. But James Monroe goes uncontested. The Federalists are gone. The Federalists are just gone. It's only Democratic Republicans. For a very short period of time, and for the only period of time this ever has happened, the United States of America has entered a one-party state. And honestly, not that bad. Not that bad for a one-party state. Far better than China did it, right? Or China's been doing it. Yes. So he gets reelected, and the era of good feelings continues, and prosperity continues, and well, most presidents have worse second terms than they do have first terms. I don't think this happens with James Monroe. I don't think it's any better. I don't think it's any worse. Remember, the whole thing about James Monroe is consistency. It's about stability. And James Monroe consistently stays consistent and doesn't do quite very much, to be honest. But he's still the representative of that founding father and will still have that last hold on the past. But that hold on the past is slowly gripping away. And eventually you start to realize this is the last presidential term, the last 4-year term that a founding father will be president. And it's the last term of this era. The last 4 years of the era. The episode is almost over. So James Monroe goes out with a bang. But not like a crazy bang, because he's consistent, he's stable, I told you. It's not really a bang, it's this important thing he does. The most important thing he does. It's the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine basically says, and here's how it goes. It's a message as a State of the Union address. And it's really a message to Europe. Basically saying to Europe, stay out of the Western Hemisphere. Stay out. And we will not interfere with you, and you will not interfere with us. And we are the protectorate of this hemisphere. Now, did Europe follow this? Not really. Not really. Did they care? Not really. Do Americans make a big deal out of it? Absolutely. Who cares? I really don't actually think it's that big of a deal. But it's an important thing for American policy because this idea of the Monroe Doctrine continues for a very long period of time. But eventually, the United States kind of gives up on one portion of the doctrine, just starts becoming a police state. But that's a few eras from now. It's a few eras from now, and that happens. Although I've been very nice to James Monroe, and I think he's actually quite outstanding compared to a lot of the other presidents that were to follow or even before him. He didn't write the Monroe Doctrine. He's credited for this Monroe Doctrine. It's called the Monroe Doctrine, but once again, Monroe gets a lot of credit for things he didn't do, and his Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams, writes the Monroe Doctrine. And remember that name, John Quincy Adams, because he's going to be very important for a very funny election next episode. Very funny, because it's very stupid. Very, very rubbish, in a way. But John Quincy Adams wrote the Monroe Doctrine. And the greatest thing John Quincy Adams ever did, greatest is kind of a weird word, but the biggest is kind of a weird word too. The most important thing he ever did is giving credit to Monroe. It is honestly quite hilarious. It is quite hilarious.
Despite the Monroe Doctrine claiming to being against foreign imperialism, we don't go east, you don't go west kind of deal, James Monroe showed the exact opposite in his foreign policy, and this can be seen in Liberia. And what is Liberia? Now, you might know that Liberia today is a country in West Africa, and but how did it become that? And why is it called Liberia? Liberia, liberty, you know who does liberty? United States, right? And that's where it comes from, because the United States actually settled Liberia. What they would do is they would basically have they would free some slaves, and you would be sent back to Africa. So they would send slaves and basically send them back to Africa. Now, this is a bad idea for a variety of reasons, but they did this for many years. And people like Abraham Lincoln were a big fan of this. So this was really an idea. And Liberia definitely had a very good, was very much tied to the U.S. in a lot of ways. Now, is it a U.S. colony? That's kind of hard to say. There are some gray areas, but you could definitely make the case it was a U.S. colony. But at the end of the day, in the 1840s, the U.S. has decided to pull back and not colonize Liberia. For better or for worse, Liberia would remain uncolonized by any European
and would be the only country region of Africa to not be colonized by Europeans, other than Ethiopia. And Ethiopia was invaded by Mussolini, so really it's only Liberia, and you could say thanks to the U.S. And Liberia is massively impacted by the U.S. In a lot of ways, they still use the imperial system, which is the U.S. standard. And the most shocking fact that so many people do not know is that the capital of Liberia, do you know what it is? It is Monrovia. Monrovia, as in James Monroe. With the exception of Washington, D.C., it is the only capital to be named after a U.S. president. If that doesn't scream imperialism, then I don't know what does. So that's just the truth. Liberia seems like a very big violation of the Monroe Doctrine. I don't know, Mr. Monroe, but then again, you didn't write the Monroe Doctrine, did you?
Monroe is coming to the end of his presidency. 1825. The end. The last few months of his presidency. He did not run again. He continued the tradition with Washington. He's quite old. And now you come to a crossroads. There are no more founding fathers left. They're very old, those ones who are still alive. And it's a new era, a new age. And Monroe's gone.
Well, James Monroe's presidency ended in a whimper. You praised him like he was freaking Muhammad Ali. Here's what I don't really get. Ever since 1823, on July the freaking 4th, 1823, is that supposed to be a special day? God damn it. You freaking locked me in here. Been in here for 1.5 years. You want me to report? Well, get me the frick out of this goddamn door. Okay? Screw you. Screw James Monroe. Screw Mike, whatever the hell his name is. Mike. Freaking Mike. Why you... Screw that anarchist piece of crap, too. Screw that communist piece of crap. Screw everybody. Screw the freaking... the Trumps and the Bidens and the goddamn... Bidens and freaking... Wait, what the... Is that freaking... I've been here for freaking 30-ass years. And there's freaking Batman on the wall. I haven't noticed that yet. Goddamn Batman! You locked me in the lease... in an off... Okay, whatever. Shut up. Not talking to you, dipshit. Time for grading. Now, of course, you know this means this, and the metrics mean this, and the graph means this. And I've got to be quite honest with you. I was very impressed by James Monroe's presidency. Now, you've already probably picked that up by the way I'm talking to him. I know Jake certainly picked it up. But, I have to disagree with Jake when he says that Angus King would have been a better president, because... Like, no. Oh, yes. No. James Monroe did a very good job. And especially considering that he was such a lesser-known founding father president compared to the other four. Everyone knows who Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison are, but very few seem to know who Monroe was, which is really interesting. Probably a flaw of the American school system, but mostly due to the fact that, I mean, he didn't really do that much. But that's what made him a good president. It's very interesting. It was the era of good feelings. It was stable. And this stability will not last, and we're seeing, of course, the divide slowly growing between the North and the South, but honestly, there's not much bad I can say about him. Of course, he owned slaves, but, you know, that's just a given, right? Yeah. Very good job, and, very good. So, let's find out if Monroe's good job is enough to join a passing grade club. Only Washington has a passing grade so far. Jefferson, Adams, Madison, they haven't even gone close to a passing grade. So, after doing computational research, and objective analysis is completely objective once again, we were able to figure out James Monroe's scoring as a president. James Monroe has a drum roll, please.
James Monroe scored a 60.03 out of 100, meaning he gets a D-, which is a passing grade. He joins Washington in the passing grade club. And if you think that's low, then you're going to think all the scores are low, you know. Just deal with it. These guys all sucked, let's be honest. And I'll get to why later. The real purpose of the grading eventually later. But overall, quite good. And that puts him in second place overall for presidents. So, yeah. Very good. Very good. Very solid. What the hell's Jake doing, by the way? You kept him in the room, right? Hello, Jake. So now I get to finally meet you. Hey, I've been harsh, but you've kidnapped me. You've basically enslaved me to make these stupid-ass videos. Like every couple years. I don't even need food, but whatever. Like, what is the point of this? You just hating on presidents? Just hating on frickin' America? It's just unacceptable. And you make me look like the bad guy, even though you've freaking, like, what the heck? What's the point of this crap? What is the point of this whole docu-series, History of the Goddamn Presidency? You think anyone's gonna watch this, uploaded it to a freaking channel with, like, how many freaking subscribers? There's probably a negative amount of subscribers on that goddamn channel. You could have gone National Goddamn Geographic. But you chose Waiver Film Productions. Epic! With epic hits, like The Search for Jeff Goddamn Book. And Hero Squad, which is like the most generic name ever. Squad, more like Hero Squat, as in it's squat shit. And I'm gonna swear. Can't do anything about it. You're a bad guy, and you're wasting my goddamn time. You made me freaking immortal, but you've not let me report on anything. I don't even have Wi-Fi, because Wi-Fi's not even been invented yet. What the hell is going on? It seemed you're very angry, Jake. And honestly, I don't blame you. I've made my fair share of mistakes on this documentary. And honestly, this might seem shocking, but I've come here to apologize. Apologize for being so arrogant, so rash with my judgment, unfair, and ultimately disrespectful of both your privacy and your independence. I'm sorry. I'm only human, and I can come across as pretentious and self-absorbed, but it's only because I care so much about what I'm trying to do. It's only because of that. And it still doesn't make up for what I've done. Now, about the locking in the door thing, I'm sorry for that. There was something going on that I can't explain, but I needed complete security. But that doesn't excuse it. That doesn't excuse it, and it's unfair. That shouldn't have happened. But at the end of the day, it's not going to matter too much. Through this whole exchange, until we get to the present day of 2023, you're not going to age one bit. You're not losing any of your life here. We've kept our contract. I've kept my contract, and you signed on to the contract. Now, it seems weird that something like this would happen, but often things are so good that they're true. Some things aren't too good to be true. Some things are too true to be good. And I don't know, I'm kind of rambling, you know what I mean. But once again, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, and I'm glad you're listening to this. But the reason why I'm doing this, the reason that I'm being very critical of the president, and the reason I need you, is because the fact of the matter is, the United States of America is an abomination of a nation. That's just the truth. It is only the truth. Look what has happened throughout its histories. War, invasions,
disease, slavery. Well, in school you learn this cookie-cutter version of the truth, with everybody happy-go-lucky and the founding fathers, when in reality the truth is so much worse. Like in real life, things aren't always what they seem. But the reality is, you've been lied to. And I'm trying to expose it, because you have no idea how bad things are. And how bad the United States is viewed by the rest of the world. They did this poll a few years ago. Well, a few years ago from modern time. Of course, we're on a different spectrum here. But they did a poll. And they asked people of other nations, what was the nation, the single country, that was the biggest threat to world peace? United States scored number 1. More votes than Iran, more votes than North Korea and Russia. And whether that's true or not, there's clearly a problem here. The United States needs to end, and I'm trying to just create all this evidence to finally stop this country. Now, how I'm going to do this, I can't explain exactly. But it's gonna happen. It's all about gathering evidence. It's all about getting truth. I apologize, but that's the fact.
Okay, I'm just gonna take this off. Honestly, that was a pretty good speech. Holy crap. You're freaking right, man. This is messed up. How one person could have this freaking much power over somebody. Now, I think, and honestly, I appreciate the apology. I've made my mistakes too. I've done similar things which hurt people. And before this whole time travel crap for the last 20 years, I was wasting my life. At least I'm not aging now. Maybe I'll get some experience. I'm sorry. It's insane. It's evil what's going on this freaking country. We've been brainwashed from such a young freaking age. You're right. Wow. I accept your apology. I hope you accept mine. And I'd be willing to work with you.
You've been lied to. By the system. By the matrix. Sorry for the burp. And also I've come to get you something. Rare, precious jewels.
Dude, freaking jewels, man. Hey, thank you. Honestly, I can't believe I'm saying thank you, but this is pretty cool. Probably worth how much is it worth?
$3 million.
Freaking 3 million, dude. 3 million, everything's freaking 3 million. Dude, I know we got into the wrong start, obviously, but let's freaking do this. I'll report for you, and we'll get through it. And honestly, thank you for the freaking opportunity. Let's freaking roll, bitch. Let's do this. And I promise not to swear as much. Let's do this, narrator. Let's go. Let's roll, man.
Well, that was the founding era, and despite being overhyped by many people, it was still very solid. Remember, this country, the United States, is still coming into its form, and you can't expect too much. Now, is it still subpar? Yes, but we still had 2 passing grades, and honestly, that's better than most eras. So, overall, very solid, and many questions are being asked what will happen next time. Will any president get a passing grade? Will anybody get a passing grade? That's a good question. And how does the country form into the next era? The founding fathers, they're drained out. They're all dead. Now new people have to rise up and become leaders in this new, still very young country. So I guess you're going to have to see how that forms out in episode 2. This was History of the Presidency, and I am your narrator. This was a great talking to you, and thank you for being part of the greatest documentary of all time. I'll see you soon.
I'm Andrew Jackson, bitches.